We've been talking Nats trade deadline. We'll get into the Commanders wide receiver room. I got an interview with Traylon Burks, some cuts from Jeremy Fowler of ESPN on the show yesterday, predicting that Diggs is still very much in play for Washington, so that's all coming up. But we haven't had a chance to take calls after yesterday's deadline until right now. Danny, we're trying to get a feel for if people are okay with what Washington did. I think it was a really prudent deadline. They took a arm in Griffin who's probably walking at the end of the year, and they tried to add pieces to the system. They took a guy in Luis Garcia who they don't perceive to be the player that he was as he turned into Barry Bonds this year, and they sold him at peak value. And I don't think the Meade trade was one they were really looking to make. He wasn't on the block. He's a controllable talent on the cheap that turned into a good player. They were able to get a starting pitcher of 5 years of control. Why not do that? So in the end, I'm okay. I think the Connolly Early deal was an A. I like the Luis Garcia Jr. trade as a A probably, maybe a B+. The one that is not going to sit as well is just that it's a really mediocre return for Foster Griffin. I just think that's what the market was. So unless you want to just have him sit around until the end of the year and possibly walk for nothing, I'll take it. I'm going to give it a C, but it's a deal I would have made.
Yeah, how much I'm with you on all those. Maybe it's a B+, A- for Garcia. Of course, time will tell on all of these. But if it's a legitimate question as to what's more valuable, the compensatory pick, a sandwich pick they would have gotten for giving Griffin the qualifying offer and having him walk, or the return of middling prospects, if that's a legitimate question, it's hard to feel excited about this trade in particular. Does that make sense? If they just let him stay here, kept trying to sign him to an extension, again, we don't know all the conversations that were going on behind the scenes and how close they were, if it was never going to happen, if the agent said, miss me with that mess, we're going to free agency, period. We don't know everything about that. So to me, how much better off would you be with that sandwich pick or with kind of their mediocre haul? I think that's the only one where you kind of go, yeah, it sort of is what it is. You kind of shrug your shoulders. That's the least exciting of the group, but I understand why it happened.
Yeah, so two other thoughts before we hit the phones. The first is on Luis Garcia, just something that I've been kicking around myself the last day or so. What is Luis Garcia really from a value standpoint? Let's be honest about this. Mm-hmm. He's leading the league in slug. I think that's what's so complicated and why so many people are thinking differently about him. But just as relevant is that he almost wasn't even kept on the 40-man roster this offseason. And if you really look at the player, take his name and how he's performing in the moment, in the last month, in the last couple months out of the equation, he's a left-handed hitter who doesn't hit left-handed pitching, hasn't in his career. He is a guy without a defensive position, really. He's been better at first than second, but he's still fringy average, a tick below average at first. He's a bad defender at second. And he's a bad base runner who's a slow base runner. I think he's 22nd percentile in speed. Now, that sounds very negative for a guy that has been great for the Nats this year and that I actually like because he's mashed. But my point is, if you're looking at this as a GM adding a piece, really good offensive player, having a great year, always going to make contact, not swing and miss, but he chases a ton. But he is a left-handed hitter who's probably going to mash righties and not hit lefties, who doesn't run well, who doesn't defend well. How much are you really getting for him? Like what do they call it? Ashburn syndrome? As I'm sitting in Ashburn, we're doing Anacostia River syndrome or Navy Yard syndrome. You're not going to break the bank for Luis Garcia. The one thing I'd want to know from an ownership standpoint, as people are trying to tie this deadline back to the ownership not committed, not spending, what have you. I asked Paul Taboni about this, as a matter of fact, in his little media Zoom that he did after the deadline yesterday. I've brought up the qualifying offer a bunch.
Uh-huh.
Did he have the ability to keep him around and extend a qualifying offer to him? Because the way that would work is it would be about $22 million, a one-year deal. It's like a franchise tag in baseball is the way to think of it. 1 year, $22 million offer to Foster Griffin where you just slap this qualifying offer on him. Now, unlike in football with the franchise tag, Danny, he does not have to accept it and be there.
Right.
He can turn it down. But when he turns it down, you get draft pick compensation. That would have been just outside of the second round, like a top 60-ish pick, that would return a prospect way better than anything they got in the Griffin deal. Now, they might say we like the quantity of 4 lottery tickets over the quality of one prospect who ranks 5th, 6th, 7th in the system, something like that. But the reason I want to know this is, did ownership tell Paul Taboni, yeah, we'll offer him the qualifying offer, 1 year, $22 million, Because if he accepts it, that's them paying him more than they've paid anybody by like $7 million.
3 times more.
Well, from a pitching standpoint, they gave Nelson Cruz $15 million. But you're right. I think, was it Trevor Williams at $7 million per?
$7 million.
Yeah, 3x for a pitcher. Maybe, you know what, I think it was a $9 million deal for Soroka, maybe, if I remember. But regardless, they have not paid a pitcher even half that much. But if he goes to them and he goes, hey, I'm thinking I want to do this qualifying offer thing. We're going to ride this out with Foster for the rest of this season. Let's slap a qualifying offer on him, and you either pay him $21 million for a year and we keep a good pitcher around, or he says no and we get a draft pick. If they said, yeah, we're not doing that, there's no chance we're risking him making $20 million, that's like a quarter of the payroll. We can't do that. That's a third of the payroll we want for next year. Well, if that's the case, now ownership's complicit in essentially not allowing you to build a big league roster and not spending. But I asked Taboni about this, and I didn't get the vibe or the feeling that he wasn't allowed to do the QO. But I would love to know that with some truth serum.
I think it's the essential question. Because, again, if you're just doing whether he's allowed to or not, but just do the balance sheet, are you better off with the compensatory pick or 4 middling prospects? If that's the legitimate question, and I think it is a legitimate question, you can make arguments either way, it's hard to be excited about the trade haul. And that's kind of my only semi-negative from this trade deadline. And the fact that, yes, here we are again. But the Griffin question, it sort of relates to ownership, to your point, whereas the others are just regular old baseball things. Hey, they've got a good offense, and they're dealing from a position of strength. With Garcia, they've got replacements in Ortiz and Brady House coming back up, et cetera. We think we'll get similar production. Not as good, but similar, and we'll be just fine. We needed some pitching help. The Griffin one, I think, kind of relates to the big picture, and we don't have answers. We have no clarity on that.
Darius, play the clip. This is Taboni on the QO yesterday.
Yeah, I have ongoing conversations with ownership with all that. I'm not going to get into the details of what it looked like when we had those conversations, but the qualifying offer one is a tricky one because what teams are balancing is like whether the player is going to accept it, whether the player is going to turn it down, and basically what happens if the player does accept it, what happens if the player does turn it down, and you get the draft pick compensation and all that. So it's a really tricky one to balance, and it's one that I'm not sure that like any team approaches with the utmost amount of confidence, But yeah, we were comfortable to roll the dice and having Foster here through the rest of the year without an extension and potentially considering that. Having said that, I think a lot of what happens over the course of the next 2 months would have dictated, right, whether like Foster was going to receive a QO, and then it's up to him, like whether he wants to accept it or not, and kind of what comes with that.
So he said we were comfortable to roll the dice. And then he talked about how he finished the season would have determined if he accepted it or not. Meaning, if he really struggled, then if you're rolling the dice that you're going to offer him the qualifying offer, 1 year and $20 million is a no-brainer. If he finishes the year with like a 4.2 ERA and he had a terrible August and September, right? But I took that to mean almost like they were nervous that maybe he'd take the offer. And I don't think this is an ownership thing. I think this might be a Tabonian front office thing. Do they want to pay a 92-mile-an-hour throw-in lefty with 7 pitches over $20 million? They talk about the Rays, like I talk about the handsome dude with abs that I want to be. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know that they want to pay that kind of money for this player. Not to say you'll never pay $20 million for a pitcher, but a guy that you're going to give 4x to after you brought him over from Japan, who'd never pitched in the big leagues before this season. Let's go to the phones. 800-636-1067. Start you off with Carlos in Alexandria on the Fan. Carlos, trade deadline yesterday.
Hey, great.
Were you okay with it?
I kind of like it. And here's my main point. Okay, actually I've got 3 main points, but here's the first one. Don't knock quantity over quality. Quality and quantity in prospects is a really relative thing. I remember on this station when we discussed the Soto trade several years ago, people were mentioning James Wood and Robert Harrell in the same sentence. That's the first point. So you don't know what's going to come out of it. You're going to judge this trade 3 years down the road. The second thing is I think this club thinks they had a version of Griffin in the Connolly kid under control for 5 years, and so they're sort of slotting him in there. The other thing is it's very clear to me that they didn't see him as a piece of the puzzle going 2-3 years down the road when these sluggers, if they're still here in the lineup, are matching up on pitching, and they can go out in the free market next year and probably get better starting pitching. And the last thing I will say is don't knock 92-mile-an-hour lefty pitches or pitchers with 7 pitches, or Tom Glavine will have a word with you.
Carlos, thank you, buddy.
A little bit different sport now, but well said. I think Tom Glavine would get knocked around pretty good these days.
Well, the essential part of that to me again is we don't know if they didn't think Griffin was going to be part of it. Again, there was buzz about them trying to sign him, and it ended up going nowhere. So that's the only part of that for Carlos that it doesn't quite jive with me. I think what happened was they realized it was not going to happen for one reason or another. It takes two to tango, of course, or it wasn't going to be at the price they wanted or whatever. So now, okay, we're going to move on from Foster Griffin. And once you get to that point, it's not a great market for that guy. And I'm actually more with Carlos. I care way less about velocity than everybody who's obsessed with it now. I care about effectiveness and getting outs, and there's a million ways to skin a cat.
Velocity is one of the great predictors of pitching success.
Because that's all that comes through now. Like, in other words, there's no Greg Maddux, there's no Glavine, there's no Dennis Martinez.
I understand, but I'm saying the guys that throw slower don't have the success as the guys that throw harder, and batting average against as velocity goes up, goes down. Like, teams wouldn't be chasing it if it wasn't analytically proven that you have more margin for error and it's harder to hit velocity.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy because that's all they're looking for. That's all that makes it to the major leagues. And yes, you were certainly looking for that. That's the cheat code. That's the easy way. I'm not saying it's easier to not throw harder. I'm saying there's no room at the table for anybody that does it any differently at this point. And someone's going to figure that out and have a staff that maybe is undervalued that actually produces some decent results. But that's another conversation for another time. But does that make sense to what I'm saying about Griffin specifically? I think it was behind the scenes, I think a couple people were like, yeah, we'd love to sign him, and maybe there's some overtures. Let's try to do that. And then it doesn't happen. That's different than he's not part of their plan, so they just moved on.
Yeah, I think he's part of their plans for sure. Was I guess.
Right?
I have to use past tense. I mean, they would tell you they're going to try to sign him once he gets to the market this offseason. I've never bought that. Like, if a guy's going to stay with you, he's going to stay with you. Mm-hmm. Generally, when you breaking up to then go on dates with other people and see if you like me best, you've already told me how you feel. But I think that they went to him and pretty quickly found out he was not going to sign a deal ahead of market at whatever they were offering. Now, I'd like to know, were they offering $12 million a year or $18 million a year or $20 million? Who knows? But that wasn't going to happen, and then they pivoted. The qualifying offer thing is still what's most interesting to me because I just want to know if they had the ability. He said we were comfortable. I took that to mean they were allowed to go that route if they wanted to. Let's go to Scott in Lake Anna on Grant and Danny after the trade deadline. Scott, how'd you feel about what the Nats did?
I'm kind of okay with it. My point is I don't think, as good as that front office is, I don't think they really appreciated the chemistry that had bonded those really young players, Meade, Wood, CJ, Garcia. They became a Musketeers group that thrived off of each other's performance, and that drove the team to do things that nobody expected them to do this year. And I think you're going to see, and we've seen it already, that the stress of that trade deadline and the potential for losing guys that they felt were really part of the team from the team members' perspective, it just took the wind out of their sails.
It's a good call. Thank you. It's a really good call. I mean, I wonder about that. Like, they're going to have to try to reinvent this. They created a culture that allowed for the chemistry that you're talking about to take hold. It's hard to reinvent. I will say I'm thinking a lot about the Orioles, who had this great farm system and never really took their shot, Danny. They never really shot the gun, and they wouldn't trade the prospects, and they hoarded them all, and they all got ready at the same time. And they won 100 games on accident. Mike Elias always thought next year was the year. Like, you do have to have some feel of being willing to break away from your vision, break away from your plan, and really going for it. I just don't think this was the year to do that by any means for the Nationals. But he's definitely right that they had a special thing in that clubhouse. Devoni talked about that yesterday, being aware of that.
Yeah.
they're going to have to recreate that. It's not
It's
just
hard
like
to do. It's
yeah,
hard to
they're
do.
not going to just be able to show up in West Palm and do the exact same thing and be number one in offense next year. It's not going to work like that.
No, but again, can you be a better baseball team? And I think that is a variable. Yes, you're weaker offensively, but maybe you don't have the worst pitching staff ever assembled, both with starters and relievers. It's a balancing act, certainly. But it is something that does matter, and I give you more credit than me. You've always tried to point out that human element of things, and they've kind of been able to get away with some of those, I don't have a better word for this, indignities along the way, sending guys down for too long, calling a guy up to get his teeth kicked in, and then sending him down for 2 weeks and kind of churning and burning through guys. They kind of kept the chemistry going. This may have been, I don't want to call it the death blow, I don't want to overstate, but this may have kind of been that last final arrow that took, as the caller I think very well said, took some of the wind out of their sails on this one. And maybe it's harder to come compete every day. Now, also, your major league club got worse over the last week in the short term. I think that's obvious.
Totally. They were already losing, with
Yeah.
that club, and I feel like that was still an inevitability. I just don't know how long you can kind of keep everything together with Miles Michaelis making a start every 5 days and Zach Littell making a start and Andrew Alvarez making a start and opening with Carson Palmquist. Like, that's not what a playoff team looks like. That's not what a wild card team looks like. Let's go to Kevin in Arlington on the Fan. Kevin, trade deadline came and went. Are you okay with what the Nats did?
For the most part, I am, Grant. And thank you for taking my call. And, I was really down on the learners, and then they hired my nephew's Cowbear teammate, and Paul Stoney. All of a sudden, I got back on the bandwagon because I just know great things about Paul, and I wanted to see how he did, and he's been phenomenal. So my only concern, and it's not even Paul, and it does center around the Griffin trade. First of all, just a couple of things. Is it a small sample size? Yes, it is. But, starters are hard to find, particularly left-handed starters. He's a mature voice in the room. Now, I know in recent years there was talk about we just don't have any adults. We don't have any mature guys to sort of lead the youngsters. So I do want to know that too. I don't know if we ever will. I think what we're going to find out is in the off season coming, what are the Mariners willing to spend? Because if you think about it, a lot of those relievers we added, and I'm glad we restocked the reliever pool, but we have barely spent anything. So when you can get cheap and good and proven relievers in the off season, you go do it. And we haven't. So we kind of have to. So for me, there's still this question about how committed truly is ownership, and
It's the question.
I don't know. We're just not know until we get to the offseason.
Yeah, Kevin, thank you, buddy, as always, man. Good to hear from you. Grant, I mean, that is the essential question. That's the sort of Damocles. It's the $1 billion question, whatever number you want to put on it, is what's the engagement, right? What's it going to be? And with this backdrop of the labor stoppage here that's also kind of hanging over everything, how are they approaching that? There's been a lot of data that indicates they're not interested in any contract that goes beyond this year if they can help it, given that backdrop. Who knows if that's because that's when Strasburg's coming off the books after this year, or because of the labor thing, because of a sale. The murkiness around ownership and their engagement level, of course it's the question. We're just peons here down on the ground getting whatever crumbs that come off the table, trying to figure out kind of the on-field product.
Yeah, I can't wait for the offseason for that reason, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
Because there's no good excuse. There have been plenty of years during rebuilds where there's no reason for the Wizards to go actively try to get better in the tank mode, so to speak.
Yep.
But you've proven you can compete. You need to add a starting pitcher. That's going to cost money. You need to spend some money on this bullpen. That costs some cash. And they're probably going to need a bat as well. That's not going to be the marquee move of the offseason, particularly if Abrams is still around. But I think there's a chance they trade C.J. Abrams this offseason, and they do recoup a bevy of what we're talking about, a plethora of the options that they need in some of these roles. But they're going to need to spend a little bit of cash at this point as well. And if they don't this offseason, then it's indicative of the fact, like post-lockout, whenever that ends, whatever, that it's not happening with his ownership group. I'm getting tweets from people throughout the day at Grant Paulson. I saw our buddy Tailgate Ted even tweeted today something to the effect of, like, I will not be spending any more money or buying any more tickets to go to Nats games. And I don't tell people how to fan. That's your own prerogative. I'll see you when you come back, I suppose. but my point on that would be, Like, save that tweet for when you find out they're not spending this offseason. To me, the deadline, what just happened, this was prudent business on taking a step from a pitching staff standpoint, trying to, sell high on a couple of guys. I don't view this as a major referendum on ownership time. If you feel like the offseason was that, no problem. Like, they should have spent on relievers. They should have spent on starters. I personally think they thought they were going to lose 98 games. So, it's like the Wizards. Should they be spending on things? But this offseason is go time. If they don't spend, if they're not committed, if they don't bring in pitching, if they are this close with this young lineup in the prime years, think of James Wood contract as like the Jaden Daniels deal that we talk about. Before he gets his big contract, you have this controllable time of him and Abrams. Do something.
Yeah.
What are you waiting for? And that's, to me, when I'd be firing off my "you won't see me at Nats Parks" tweets.
I get that. I mean, I also understand, it's, as you said, I don't teach people how to fan or lecture them about it. It is your dollar, right? It's your
Totally.
It's your
No. People
investment.
can do whatever they
Yeah.
want to do. I'm just saying that, like, the take to me, and a lot of people feel this way, is like the deadline yesterday, Danny, was Groundhog's Day of Luis Garcia became really good and they immediately traded him. And it feels like Soto or any of the other guys that they've moved on from. I just don't think it's apples to apples. That's all.
I agree with you 100%. But I can understand the person that this is my fun thing, and it got less fun yesterday for the short term. And it's not like you're getting a refund. You don't get the percentage of your committed dollar back of the joy that Luis Garcia would have provided as his leading the league in slugging percentage. But I understand, again, in a vacuum, on a binary looking at these trades, I'm like, yep, I get it, I'm in. I understand in Nats fan perspective, though, going, looking at my watch, 7 years, man. 7 years of this.
100%.
When does that end? And I understand that.
No,
I guess that's all.
From a 10,000-foot view looking down, they have not done anything financially that signals that they want to win pretty much since the World Series. That's a hard argument to come back from.
Right.